Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now, as you might have heard, this Thursday the premiere trailer drops for The Amazing Spider-Man 2. However, we already have a leaked poster online for the sequel via a very grainy screen grab. Now, you can't get a great look, but it's a nice tease for the confirmed 3 villains in the movie. So on the left here you have the Rhino, and I don't know about you, but I can't even make out which end is up, and I think that's largely because you can't see Paul Giamatti's face, which I think is an interesting choice for the movie and the actor. I guess they're trying to legitimize his armor, but if your armor is shaped like a giant rhino, how legitimate is it to begin with? So I don't know. I have no idea what to expect from that villain. I kind of questioned him even being in the movie in the first place, but we'll see how he looks in the trailer. Now in the middle, up on the top there, you see a Green Goblin. Now of course the question is, who is it? Is it Norman Osborn or is it Dane DeHaan, who will be playing Harry Osborn? That's a confirmed casting. There are rumors, I believe, that Chris Cooper might be playing Norman Osborn, but that looks more like Dane DeHaan to me. So that'll be a big, huge change in mythology to go right to the Harry Osborn version of the Green Goblin. Now, in the wish list episode that I did with Jaden recently about The Amazing Spider-Man 2, one of my things that I wished for was, taking chances and not just religiously following the comic book mythology. So I'm on board for this. I asked for it, so let's see what they come up with. And it would create kind of like a mirrored effect of a teenage superhero versus a teenage villain. They kind of come from the same place. So, make them equals instead of having to, how Spider-Man classically fights this adult corporate titan. But that would be a big change, and so we'll see what happens. But to me, so far, that looks like Dane DeHaan under there. Then, the reason I really brought this up, which I find fascinating, is Electro. Now, as you can see here, he's wearing the hoodie. And ever since Trayvon Martin, the hoodie has had taken on much deeper meaning and very symbolic and political meaning as well. So it's very loaded to have Electro wearing this hoodie as part of his regular getup. Now, from the set photos that we'd originally seen, it looked like Electro just first donned the hoodie to kind of like hide out while he was transitioning into full-fledged villain. And it's like, good luck hiding your glowing face, Electro. But by putting him on the poster in this outfit, it almost seems like this is what they're going to stay with. Now, I don't know how the costume that they showed in the front of Entertainment Weekly is going to come into play, which seemed to be a little bit more superhero-y, but I actually would prefer to keep this hoodie look, precisely because it is political. It is a loaded look. It does bring up Trayvon Martin and that kind of a discussion. And I think it's the kind of bold choice that's needed to make Electro a memorable villain. So this is the question, though. I'm wondering how you guys feel and how you think the audience will feel overall. Do you think people will appreciate this political discussion and this layer to the film, or do you think they're going to be like, you know what, I just want to see a popcorn summer movie. I don't need to have a discussion about what happened to Trayvon Martin and society in general where we are at this point. I don't want that in my summer movie-going experience. Now, I feel that this benefits any movie to have this kind of, particularly comic book movie, though, to have this subtext. I mean, look how well it worked, I feel, for Nolan's Batman movies. There was very much, that's one of the things I like the most about The Dark Knight Rises. Even though I felt it had a lot of problems, I love that it was ripped from the headlines of Occupy Wall Street. I thought that was very important. They made the Joker, they really highlighted in The Dark Knight that he was an anarchist. I thought that was fascinating. And so I think that to bring this up works very well in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I think brings a much-needed layer of sophistication that was lacking in the first film. So I like it, but it is very loaded. It is going to add, a very heated aspect to the film, potentially. And some people, don't take this stuff very seriously, and I would hate to see jokes coming about that. I mean, like, you might have caught that horrible story about some people who decided to go for Halloween as Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, I believe. It was a photo that was tweeted around and got some news attention for its bad taste. People might, you might add an element of people being angry that Trayvon Martin references in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and might lead to some unfortunate jokes kind of like as a backlash. So it's as I said, it's loaded. But I think it's fascinating, and I think it's what I was hoping to see from Jamie Foxx in this role. So I'm curious what you guys think. So write down below how you feel about adding that element, the hoodie, to The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And you think it will build the mythology around that, or do you think it will deflate it and it will just become a hoodie? All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, speaking of villains, as you are probably well aware, there's the old adage in Hollywood that that's the only role that foreign actors can get. And in fact, after Jean Dujardin won his Oscar for the The Artist for Best Actor, he had a great video on Funny or Die where he was auditioning to play the villain in a number of different films. It's a really good one. But somebody who's embraced that and it's helping their career is Christoph Waltz, because he's working. You know, Jean Dujardin doesn't work he's in the upcoming Monuments Men. He's still making a lot of films in Europe, but he's not working as much in Hollywood as I personally would like to see. But Christoph Waltz is. Now, of course, he came onto the Hollywood on fire with Inglourious Basterds and won an Oscar for his portrayal there as one of the most, I think, memorable villains of all time. Then he went on to The Green Hornet. He was the villain in Epic over the summer, that animated movie. He was in The Three Musketeers. The Paul W.S. Anderson steampunk version is the villain. He's also just signed on for Horrible Bosses 2 to play a villain. I think Chris Pine will be playing his son as a kind of like a villain duo. But then he wants to keep going. It said this weekend it was reported that Christoph Waltz is interested in playing the villain in Pirates of the Caribbean 5. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Do you think that this is a great idea and it's like, wow, Christoph Waltz is just going to up the zany quotient on that franchise? Or do you think they're going to jump the zany shark? I have some concern. I feel that putting Christoph Waltz, because you'll note that Christoph Waltz always plays Hans Landa. He always plays the character that he created in Inglourious Basterds. You know, that wasn't so much a creation. That was just great casting on Quentin Tarantino's part, because that seems to be largely who Christoph Waltz is. That's his persona as an actor, at the very least. So that's who you're going to get. You're going to get basically Jack Sparrow versus Hans Landa. So I don't know how I feel about that. It could be fascinating to watch. It could be too much. But, you know, you have these foreign directors coming in to direct Pirates 5, the Kon-Tiki duo from Norway. So maybe they might actually be able to temper Christoph Waltz a little bit and, you know, bring him down. But does anybody want to see a tempered Christoph Waltz? I'm not sure. I'm very iffy on the whole thing. We'll have to see how it turns out. But, you know, I can't blame Christoph Waltz for wanting to get work. Now, at the same time, he won his second Oscar for, you know, I felt a pair of bookends performances in Tarantino films, you know, the villain in Inglourious Basterds, and then, you know, the anti-hero, or basically I feel largely a hero, in Django Unchained. So it would be nice. I wish he could get more diverse roles, because it looks like he doesn't have a diverse persona as an actor. So I would like to see him do that, but hey, you know what? If this is the best he can do, more power to him, and I liked Pirates 4 so much, I'm definitely seeing Pirates 5. So that's the casting rumor there. So that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day, oh yes, some people might feel that Star Wars is a villain, because Star Wars Episode 7, as I reported, took that December date in 2015, and I was talking about who's going to move. And one of the people everybody was like, has to move is Warcraft, because Warcraft was originally on that date. And sure enough, Warcraft has moved. Warcraft is no longer coming out in December 2015. It's been pushed to March 2016. Now, that's a pretty good date. This is the popular date, March, the first weekend in March. I believe they're taking the second weekend in March, because the first weekend in March is taken by a Disney animated film in 2016. But Warcraft will be coming out basically at the same time frame that 300 came out. Zack Snyder basically made it his career off of that date, because 300 and then Watchmen came out at the same time. The first Alice in Wonderland from Tim Burton came out at that date. That's a pretty solid release date. So I can see why they took it, but I feel bad they had to blink and move, and I think that, you know, that's already kind of like a, you know, strike against them, and it's unfortunate. But as I think everybody felt, that you just can't go opposite Star Wars, especially considering the money that's at stake with the Warcraft franchise. Now, whether or not Warcraft will work out, we'll see. They've cast an unknown and Paula Patton so far, that's it. Colin Farrell was apparently in the mix, but he's not officially signed yet. I don't know if he's still even in contention. But you don't have lack of real star power. But, some people might say, well, Warcraft, the Warcraft itself is the star. But outside of gaming circles, that's not very well known to the mainstream. I mean, I wrote some Warcraft and StarCraft comics, and that's why I'm familiar with Warcraft and StarCraft. But if not for that gig, I mean, a lot of people, I wouldn't know about it. So I think that they have an uphill battle. They're not the kind of brand that Star Wars is. So we'll see. But poor Warcraft had to move. Duncan Jones just can't catch a break in Hollywood. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. The question comes from Apollyon 7, and it's in reference to, on Friday, I talked about the MPAA slicing and dicing films, and they were cutting out, they were making Charlie Countryman, much to Evan Rachel Wood's disappointment and anger, making them cut sex scenes out of that film, and also Wolf of Wall Street had sex scenes and drug use scenes cut out of the film so that it could get just an R rating and not an NC-17. So Apollyon 7 says, Grace, the comic book code really hurt the comic book industry until it was finally done away with, just like Prohibition did more harm than good. Do you think it's time for the MPAA to be done away with so artists can make movies they want without being censored? Interesting question. I think that you need some kind of rating system because I think audiences need to know what they're getting into. I think people don't need to be surprised. And I think that you might be right. I don't know if artists need to be censored by some governing body because the market will censor them. If they go too far, their movie won't make money. So I think that element is there. So maybe I think a good happy medium, Apollyon 7, would be maybe to do away with the MPAA, but just do what you do on television. You'll notice before, especially shows on cable, and also sometimes even network shows. But what they do is they have a little screen come up at the beginning and they say, they caution audiences and they say, oh, strong language is in this episode, sexual situations, extreme violence, just they have little phrases just to kind of like the categories, like a checkbox. They're like, okay, be ready, this is coming. And I know some people are like, hot damn, when their category of choice comes up, and they're like, this is going to be a good episode. I've been guilty of that myself. So I think that could work, and you can maybe just have something on the poster, a little box that just has the different categories, and maybe even a checkbox, and just check the ones people need to be concerned about. Because as some people brought up in the comments, I was not aware about this. Nebraska has been given an R for swearing, and Philomena had to fight for a PG-13 rating because it had 2 F words in it. And there was the King's Speech controversy as well that had to be censored, and they had to actually recut the film so it didn't. So one version was a PG-13 to take out just an F word. And I was talking about this even with my parents, and even my parents felt. My dad in particular, sometimes can be a little bit old-fashioned about this, but he was like, who doesn't hear cursing these days? It's everywhere. And to give a film like Philomena or, as someone else pointed out, Nebraska, an R rating for 2 F words and spoken by just, in just everyday context is ridiculous. So I think, I agree. I totally agree. The MPAA at very least needs to be reformed, but potentially maybe done away with and just have this TV system applied across the board. That's what I think. So that's today's morning movie news. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's stories and viewer question and what you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.